Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time. And no, this is not going to be as angry as yesterday because, I don't know, chapters. I've already forgotten where I am. Chapter 38 to 40 something. Yeah, I'll find out. I think it's about 45. Probably 44, 45, something like that. Is where I'll stop. The Shadow Rising is not that bad. By which I mean, no more peddlers show up. So that's nice. There will be other stuff that I find problematic, of course, because, this is still the Wheel of Time and it's still not a very good fantasy book. So let's get started on all of that, shall we, right? Oh well. Cheers. Alright, so what do we find today? Mostly two places this time around. We're finally getting back to Tanshiko for a bit, and then we go back to hang out with our good buddy Perrin and gang in the Two Rivers. Who knows what's going on with the rest at, with the Aiel? We don't know, but we'll have some other stuff going down. So, let's look at these things, shall we? Right, so first we have Tanshiko from the villain's perspective, I guess. And villains in this case means several of them, because, there's always more than one. And we find out that both the Seanchan and the Black Aja and the corrupt side of the what's their name? Of the Children of the Light are obviously in Tanshiko. Everyone is in Tanshiko. It doesn't make any sense, but we have not expected actual functioning world building from Robert Jordan so far, so why should we get it now, right? Alright, my point is, we start out with one of those Seanchan people, and I always wanted to call her Egwene, but it's a name very similar to Egwene, who's there as an agent for the Seanchan, and she's collecting those kind of necklace, leashes for channel people, and things like that. And she's doing weird intrigue stuff, but it's barely. It's not very intriguing. It is what I'm trying to say here. What else is interesting about that? Not that much, really. It's one of the seekers from the the throne of the Nine Moons comes over, and she has to do whatever because of the rigid structure of their society. But she kind of deceives him and doesn't tell him about the one soul in her cellar, and there's going to be something there in the future, just not yet. So we'll see where all of that will be going in the, in the next couple of chapters. I just found that part more or less, I don't care that much about it. It just is made to kind of show us how corrupt and fucked up Tanshiko and Taraban as a whole is. And, well, I mean, we've kind of mentioned before that Robert Jordan is not exactly a master of, unique, deep cultures and stuff, and I think there's reasons for that I will probably try to explain in a separate video on, why Wheel of Time's cultures are so god-awful. Here to make clear that everything is full of intrigues, the place is basically on its last legs. There's rebels out there all over the place, and the emperor and not emperor, but the king and the Senate. That is maybe not the Senate, but the council. I keep forgetting, are sort of playing at power games that don't really work. It's basically like the western part of the Roman Empire near its end, written by someone who has not understood Roman history. Sort of. There we go. And you have a lot of refugees, and everyone is when we see the evil ones, we know that they're evil because they treat everyone like shit. And the other one that we see there is, I mean, there's two others that we see there, and that's one of them is the man named Bors, who is, one of the Seekers for Truth and Penitent. No, wrong book. One of the Inquisitors of the Children of the Light, and they have like the Hand of Truth. Is that the name? Whatever. Those people, right? So we know him from the prologue of The Great Hunt, and he's now in Tanshiko, striking a deal with the king to put the king's lover, I guess, into power with the Children of the Light and all of that stuff. And then he comes back home, and, well, who do you think will show up? It's, of course, what's her name? Liandrin Sedai, who I think is actually from Tanshiko, but I might be confused on that count. I'm not 100% sure, but, who I think is from Tanshiko. Anyway, she shows up, she threatens and co-opts the guy and makes sure that, like, they in this case being obviously the Black Aja, get also into that palace once the Children of the Light have secured it. So there's that plan, and I don't know, she just behaves like shitty again because it's Robert Jordan's fine and subtle way of describing villains. Of course, she hates men, so she always uses like the dog metaphor. Of course she does. Which, maybe that's all Robert Jordan's kink, and I can't really fathom it, but man, is it like ridiculous at this point. It's like, no villain ever spoke that way. Never. You don't do that. Just like, Anyway, and then she goes back home to the gang of the Black Aja, and they're all hanging out there, behaving like dickheads, and planning to get into that place to find some sort of ter'angreal, I guess, in that palace of the Penarch? That's her name? Whatever. The place that Egwene wandered through with the dinosaur skeleton and the Mercedes logo in there. That place. So yeah, that's sort of where they want to go, and then they want to do something to Rand. They want to bind him, which I assume is sort of what was hinted at in The Dragon Reborn. And as far as I know, they need 13 Aja to do that kind of thing, and they don't have 13 anymore. They only have 11 because 2 got killed at the beginning of the book. But then again, maybe Robert Jordan forgot to count, or he'll just invent 2 more Black Aja out of absolute nothingness. Or just possibly, if he's smart, which, I have my doubts at this point, he could possibly conjure up 2 Black Aja from the White Tower who travel to Tanshiko with some knowledge and stuff, and join the gang there to do we're gonna put us a big leash on our good buddy Rand, who is, unfortunately not in Tanshiko, but on Arrakis, I assume. He's still hanging out with the Fremen, so I guess we'll see where all of that is going in the near future. But mainly, so far, we just have really unbelievable villains behaving villainously, being spiteful just for, the pleasure of being spiteful, arrogant, and whatnot. And can I just say that Robert Jordan, we already found out that Robert Jordan's prose is not very good, right? And he tends to use the same phrases all over, like, again and again and again and again, and it is really annoying. One that really, for whatever reason, really, really fucking annoys me is Liandrin and her rosebud mouth. Like, no! Robert fucking Jordan. A rosebud mouth that is always pouting. I read that and I want to punch Bobby J in his rosebud mouth and see how that works. But fuck's sake, that's like such a ridiculous metaphor. And he trots it out every single time Liandrin shows up somewhere. Luckily, rosebud mouths are not as anti-Semitic as hooked noses, so we're kind of safe on that regard here. But, the way she behaves is just so over the top bad. I don't know. I still find it like very, very difficult to take any of those villains like only halfway seriously. I can't like they're ridiculous, all of them. All right, but that's sort of what we see in that first chapter. The depiction of like all the corruption and decadence of Tanshiko feels a bit cheap. I've said that before. It's like the culture things, like the idea of like decadence in general is something that I find repulsive. It's like, don't use that term in any way because there's always a moral judgment in there. It's like, for a city that is supposedly filled with refugees from a civil war and a not so civil war, full of poverty and all of that, to describe it the way he does, Robert Jordan, just feels like he lacks any form of tact or idea of that. It's like, yeah, lacks tact is what I would say in this case. I can't fully explain it. It just feels heartless in a unnecessary way. And I mean, there may be like real life experiences of like cities, war torn cities or whatever, but it just doesn't add up. And it feels very much like, someone who has read the wrong kind of books on Roman history and drawn the wrong kind of conclusions from that. But we will see where all of this will be going in the future of this part of the story. Second chapter in that regard is obviously the arrival of like our girl squad, with their like 2 men bodyguards, which are not bodyguards, the thief taker or thief catcher, whatever, and Tom Merlin. And there's good and there's bad. The question of like why everyone's favorite shitty pirate Bail Doman does not recognize Tom Merlin, who traveled on his boat with the Trollocs and is by all means a very, very, recognizable kind of person, with those like white mustaches that he's always blowing out and his, or smoothing down, and his gleeman's cloak. Like, why does Bail Doman recognize the 2 girls, Egwene and Nynaeve, but not Tom Merlin? And like, yeah, he looks at it as if he recognizes Tom. So we can probably later on have the situation where he finally recognizes him, and you're like, yeah, that feels artificial. However, as things go, it's not the biggest atrocity when it comes to narrative and plot in these books, so let's just keep it at that. Anyway, he recognizes our girls, decides to go and do the honorable thing, which is help them find a place to stay and all of these kind of things. Now, what is interesting is that he's apparently, at this point already, a big smuggler king, owning several boats, several fast ships and some slow ships and whatnot. He's basically king smuggler, and he has had a couple of weeks to pull that off. Maybe 2 months. Not more than 2 months, I would say. And that's, sort of what I said yesterday, the problem that time doesn't work in these books. It just doesn't work in these books. At all. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. So anyway, the rest of them, they're just settling down. There's an actually sort of okay scene. And that's in that chapter, whatever it is, 39, I assume, a silver cup or a cup of wine, one of those. And, the idea of Elaine getting drunk, I like that. Don't get me wrong, it's like, I like the idea of Elaine being, sheltered because she's like basically the daughter heir of Andor, and she's like super powerful, not knowing of the dangers of drinking wine in the common room of an inn, basically, because she's never had that experience, and thus obviously getting drunk like all of us did on our like first unsupervised visit to any bar with sufficient funds, I guess. So yeah, having that in there, that's actually a neat thing because it kind of shows that that side of Elaine's character, that is, that she's, on the one hand, she's extremely knowledgeable and has a lot of experiences and, well, actual practical knowledge that those people from Emmonsfield, from the Two Rivers, just don't have because they grew up in, at the arse end of nowhere. And Elaine has education. Elaine knows a lot of stuff, but when it comes to these practical experiences, she is very much, on her own, very innocent in a way, because she, never had an opportunity to actually make these experiences that people like Matt or Rand or possibly even Nynaeve and Egwene have already made. I mean, I guess Egwene grew up in a bar, in an inn. She probably has some experiences of like how these things go. Elaine just doesn't have that. And to see that side of her personality, that weird, almost innocent side of her personality, is something that I personally appreciate being there. And it's sort of competently done. It kind of gives, especially with that idea that she actually finally recognizes or remembers who Tom is and goes back to his room and does that. I mean, yeah, depictions tell don't show. Depictions of drunkenness can be sort of cringy, I feel, and this one is not exactly an exception to that, but it could have also been worse. So that part, it's decent. Plus, we get the whole, we get more of the, how to say, dreaming stuff. That's what I wanted to say. Nynaeve goes dreaming, and she meets someone who may once again be Slayer, or maybe not, and does all kinds of stuff. Of course, also, Nynaeve seems to have issues with like not walking around bare-ass naked, or at least in very expensive underwear or whatever, because apparently that's like all those girls do whenever women walk into the world of dreams. The first thing they do is play around with how they look and their clothes. Whereas when Perrin goes into the dream world, he's all about hammer, axe, axe, hammer, axe, ooh, axe, and that's it. Because Perrin has like very limited thought capacity, so that's what you get with Perrin. Whereas the girls go through like, ooh, I could wear even less. Because I'm thinking of a dude, and that's like the first thing I do. So that's, I pointed it out yesterday. It is not getting better this time round. It is still annoying because Nynaeve does the same kind of thing, even if she's on her own. And see, I don't mind the idea of like, that your subconscious has a lot more influence or whatever in your dream state. That's actually an interesting idea. I just once again find the execution lacking, because what it does is like, yeah, women apparently, if they don't have like full-on control of morals and like society around them, are all thinking just about men all the time, immediately. And that's kind of shitty to think it that way or to depict it that way. But there we are. However, Nynaeve survives. We get a bit of a hangover scene with Elaine, and that's that, sort of. The other annoying bit, however, is, of course, once again the whole fight for competence. And that's sort of the problem, right? The competency fight between and it seems to, and it's once again like one of those really dumb, like, gender things, right? Because apparently there's almost never any form of like serious conversation between genders. We'll have like a good example later on, just for a second. But the idea that, like, of course, as soon as you're in there, in Tanchico, it starts out to be a pissing contest between Nynaeve and Egwene on the one hand, and I'm pretty sure they will start squabbling just as soon as they can, and on the other hand, Tom and the thief taker, whose name I have forgotten, because he's not that important. Anyway, and it's who can actually find the Black Ajah and who has ideas. And I mean, why? Why the fuck is... I mean, if we read this as sort of a philosophical treatise, the argument that Robert Jordan is laying out to us is that the human species, humanity as a whole, is doomed because whenever we have a serious problem, instead of actually tackling it, we will get back into the trenches to fight the gender wars even more so. And by gender wars, I obviously mean... Well, I mean what Robert Jordan means, which is men fighting women and women fighting men, and we'll never get out of that. And that's going to be the doom of mankind. Trust me. Trust Bobby J. And that's a fairly depressing view of humanity and of human interactions, and a lot more. Because it overshadows the entire fucking thing all the time. And, yeah. It sucks. Really. Alright. So much for Tanshiko. It's not off to a good start, unfortunately. But we got a bit more actual character development to Elaine, and that's neat. Also, at least finally someone actually gets drunk in these books. That's something, isn't it? Now let's look at Perrin and gang. We're back in the Two Rivers, and we have the weird setup, which is Perrin runs around with his gang, Lord Luke, whom I still think is Slayer and possibly a Forsaken, but at least something evil and connected to Slayer. Have this weird rivalry thing going on, and then Perrin runs his army into a trap, which was maybe laid for him by Lord Luke, or maybe just happened because of whatever. And then we get they go to Emond's Field, which has become a fortress, and Perrin becomes a general and leader of men. And then we have a confrontation, sort of a dumb confrontation with the White Cloaks, and that's about where this ends. And this plotline, as a whole, it works. I'm fine with it. It mostly works. You could probably, cut out a shitload of stuff to make it a bit sleeker, easier to read, less repetitive to read. That would be fine, but apart from that, mostly it works. So yeah, plot well done, because there's actual, there's stuff happening. It's nothing super big, but even the idea of, Perrin having to come to terms with the fact that being a leader will automatically also result in people dying because this is war. Yeah, I can live with that. That's pretty neat. That's pretty solid. So let's look at the stuff that's not so good. We have a return to the Tuathon. And there's a bunch of things going on there that I find difficult to look at. Let's start. So they come to the Tuathon. It's once again made clear that the Tuathon are the traveling people are. It's exactly the same band, because there's only... Of course it is the same band. Didn't I say so before? I think I judged it right. Of course that's going to be the same gang. So it's Rain and gang. Or as I think of the Tuathon at this point, only the hippie Aiel. The hippie Aiel are hanging out there, and they're all about this being, they're pacifists. And the Way of the Leaf is all about no violence whatsoever, and everyone will die in their proper place and proper time, and let's not do anything about it and whatnot. They're overtly pacifist. And you know what? I like that. I think it's really cool to have that. You could make an actual exploration of what that actually means out of that. Now, obviously, Robert Jordan is not going to do that, because Robert Jordan is not exactly, your master of philosophy here. Instead, what we get is a bit of like a refreshment because they have all the innocence and all of that stuff, and they're like how they're partying while Perrin is kind of saved. And there's something really good there in that scene where Perrin gets where Perrin has an actual conversation with Faile. That one I really want to point out is the first time in these 4 books, where it's like fairly close to the end of the 4th book. We're 3/4 through this thing at this point. But that's the first time that a man and a woman have had a serious conversation on like equal terms without being just dickheads for the sake of it. And that, you know, that's really refreshing. People being honest, apologizing even, maybe, sort of, or at least being open about the fact that they were not, all open and not always honest to the other. Actually acknowledging their mistakes and trying to, come to terms that maybe they kind of like each other, or, well, love each other, and do that sort of as equals. Who'd have thought it? Like, what a novel concept. 4 books in, and it's the first fucking time this happens. I was flabbergasted, sort of. So yeah, there we go. Pretty fun, a pretty good scene, and I want to point that out. Bobby J, well done. However, there's obviously, enough crap to go around, because this is still the Wheel of Time. And right before that actual serious conversation between Faile and Perrin, which, of course, Faile is, high nobility of Zaldea. Of course she is. We got, but before that, we have that scene when they're still like, when the boys drag wounded Perrin into the cart of the Tuathon, and then the Isla, I think that's her name, the Rain's partner, sends out all those men saying healing is women's work. And then we have it once again. We have that weird idea of like clear gender separations. Like, yeah, this is women's work, this is men's work. Men go smithing and hunting mammoths, while women tend their wounds and do embroidery. Because deep in her heart, Faile is also good at embroidery, apparently, and baking bread and shit, because that's exactly what she does at this point. She actually, mends Perrin's clothes and does other stuff and becomes all good wife, which is, the term that Robert Jordan loves so much about it. Anyway, so I found that, like, weird that you have that, like, clear, this is women's work, this is men's work kind of thing, which, yeah, I know a lot of fantasy does that, because a lot of fantasy has very weird ideas of, like, how gender roles were in, say, medieval Europe. But, what can you do? But then we have that serious conversation. I want to point that out because that's actually pretty good. We then have Aram show up again. And he's all asking after Egwene, which, nice. Perrin is behaving all macho towards him, and, the next day, Perrin walks off. He also has, like, another encounter with Slayer, who runs around there, and finds out that the Waygate is open once again, and he wants to do something about it, but he's way too wounded, so he goes to Emond's Field instead, for now. And the Tuathon decide not to go with him because they don't want to go into any form of fortress or whatever, and instead want to stay free and safe out there as pacifists, while there's armies of Trollocs running around, which, yeah. Then we get our big battle and defense and whatnot of Emond's Field, and then we come to the really, like, fucked up part of that. And the fucked up part of that is that after the Trollocs have been defeated for now, the survivors of the Tuathon flee into town because, of course, being pacifists out there ended up with most of them being slaughtered by the Trollocs. Which, There's an underlying idea here that I really don't like, and it's kind of sort of explored, but not really. When later on, when Aram decides to actually take up a sword to become a man, a true man, accept the reality of this being a violent world, and so forth, while his parents, those damn hippies, are like mortally shocked by his decision to become like everyone else and leave the way of the leaf behind. So why is that a problem? See, it's a problem because it's basically, at its like basic, it's a political statement, and it's one that I personally find highly problematic, because basically it's a fairly conservative political statement, right? It's one that, and it's a fairly militaristic statement. Now, I can sort of see why that is probably the kind of worldview that someone like Robert Jordan would subscribe to, but I still find the narrative that, being peaceful is the ideal, but it is not possible in this our world. We have to do realpolitik. We have to go and do, all the dirty war stuff, because right now, if you believe in actually living a peaceful life, or changing stuff, then you're like really naive, and the real world will gobble you up. And that's a toxic fucking narrative. It is. It is an absolutely toxic narrative, because if you tell that to your children and everyone, and you put it into your fucking fantasy books, what you're basically advocating for is no change whatsoever, because change, is kind of scary. And that's just like a narrative that I feel, I've seen that before in other books, and it just came up here, and I just really don't like that kind of narrative. This idea of like those like Tuathon are those dreamers, and that's it sounds so good, but unfortunately it's impossible to do. So we have to all go out there and solve all our problems with violence. That's not true. No one ever said that the way of the leaf, or the way, the Tuathon being like basically the hippie ideal, and them all smoking, I don't know, it all being about the way of the leaf. It has interesting connotations to me. Anyway, my point stands, however, that to have those people basically as the group that has disconnected themselves from the harsh realities of the world, and will either adapt and become part of that harsh world, or be punished ruthlessly. And to not see that as an indictment of the world as it is, and instead as, motivation to leave behind that way of life, is just something that rubs me the wrong way. And once again, you can make arguments why this is the case, and you can probably find some of that in Robert Jordan's biography, but it still is unnecessary, and I don't know. It just sucks. All right, what else is there that we need to talk about? More of that really shitty women trying to guide, rule, or whatever men kind of stuff in the conversations between Mr. Alvear and Fail. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. It's just like, it's shitty all the fucking way, because it gives so much basis for all this like terrible old white men misogyny, and all kinds of other forms of misogyny, the depiction of women and how they talk about men and whatnot. It just happens again and again, and it fucking annoys me. However, I guess we also need to talk about the Children of the Light coming to town, which is sort of interesting, because, we have all the fanaticism there. They just hate Perrin because of all this like faulty information. And once again, it's something I mentioned before. Robert Jordan loves to pull someone did not see something, so they're going on the basis of a misunderstanding, or someone was forcefully, magically yanked aside and thus did not hear the full message, and it will create a lot of chaos and more plot. And it's the same fucking thing here with, Dane Bornhold and And but the interesting thing is that Bornhold Younger is apparently very much an alcoholic at this point, and even more insane. So we'll see where all of that is going. Is there possible redemption for Thane Bornhold? Will he join? I don't know. Oh, I guess we'll find out. Or not. Or is this the end? We don't know yet. Good on Perrin for actually trying to, find a compromise there. I just really hope, for everyone's sake, mostly mine, that this time around it will actually work and the Children of the Light will not go all out, treacherous or whatever, because that would be not good. That's what I'm saying here. All right. Apart from that, I'm kind of done with this. I mean, this is like 3/4 of The Shadow Rising. The plot has mostly been better than anything before. We had like our first actual conversation between a man and a woman. That's pretty neat. And I'm still kind of interested to see where all of this is going. How if all groups will meet at the end of this. There's potential for this to be an interesting ending of a book and the plot to actually be decent. However, I'm still finding it difficult to overlook all the shitty stuff that is basically all those terrible assumptions and depictions of, anything like culture, gender, or whatever in the background. That's sort of my main problem, and I assume it will remain the problem until the end of days, or a memory of light, I guess. So yeah, that's that. No anti-Semitism, sort of. That's a very low bar, isn't it? All right, it's okay. I'll talk to you tomorrow about the next couple of chapters. Have a great evening. Cheers.